Throughout the history of humanity, our species has encountered natural forces that have created disasters on an epic scale that changed history. These events were so devastating that we can only imagine what it was like for those who experienced them in person. From tidal waves to plagues to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, the ancient world bore the brunt of some of the most deadly natural disasters in history. These events, while in the distant past, reshaped the world and made our present civilization possible. Had some of these disasters not taken place, the world as we know it would be a much different place now. Join us as we take you on a journey to experience 5 of these natural disasters and to learn from those who came before us. As always, please relax, find a quiet spot, and enjoy the video. Number 5. Eruption of the island of Thera. Between 1642 to 1540 BC, the volcanic island of Thera in the Mediterranean near Greece exploded in a major catastrophic eruptive event. The island, now known as Santorini, was devastated in the eruption and caused widespread damage and effects throughout the region. This eruption was so violent that it registered near the top of the modern-day Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI. The Thera eruption measured between 6 and 7 on that index scale, with 7 being the top of the scale. This very intense eruption devastated the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri, the surrounding communities, and nearby agricultural areas. It also affected nearby islands and the coast of the island of Crete, with a related earthquake and tsunami. The Thera volcano has erupted many times over several 100,000 years before the Minoan eruption. The eruptions are part of a repeating process where the volcano violently erupts and then eventually collapses into a circular seawater-filled caldera, with numerous small islands forming a circle around the caldera. The caldera slowly refills with magma, building a new volcano, which erupts and then collapses to complete the process, which repeats over and over again throughout history. The Thera eruption, as previously mentioned, had a VEI of 6 to 7. More recent studies indicate that this eruption was truly at the top end of the scale with a VEI of 7. The volume of ejected lava was estimated to have been 24 cubic miles in volume, roughly 4 times the amount ejected by the well-recorded eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. After effects of the Thera eruption caused a number of crop failures in China, and tree ring evidence from around the world dates the eruption to 1628 BC. The Thera eruption sterilized the island in the same manner as what occurred at Krakatoa, due to the sheer amount of ashfall and violent eruptive force that occurred when the volcano collapsed. This collapse destroyed the island, leaving a circular ring of islands that shows the outline of the caldera where the volcano once stood. Only the Mount Tambora volcanic eruption of 1815 released more material into the atmosphere during historic times. Since no human remains have been found at the town of Akrotiri, the early volcanic activity likely caused the island's population to flee. Evidence also suggests that several months before the eruption, Thera experienced 1 or more earthquakes, which damaged local settlements. These warnings likely saved the lives of the island residents who heeded them and left the region before the ultimate destruction of the island. Thera may well be the inspiration for the tale of Atlantis, and some theories indicate that certain Egyptian mistranslations of Plato's writings mistakenly attribute the sinking of his island of Atlantis to approximately 9,000 years before Plato's time. There is much debate on these speculations, but given the similarities between Atlantis and Thera, it isn't a stretch to imagine that Atlantis and Thera are one and the same. The Minoan civilization seems to have survived the disaster, but the destruction of their home island left their once strong seafaring empire greatly minimalized. The Mycenaean conquest of the Minoans seems to have occurred not long after the disaster on Thera. The Mycenaeans were a military civilization, and using their functional navy and well-equipped army, were more than capable of an invasion of Thera. Whatever history decides was the ultimate cause of the decline of the Minoans, it is clear that the devastating blow to their once thriving civilization was the destruction of their home island of Thera and the loss of their navy and commercial fleet of ships. Number 4. The Bronze Age collapse. When one thinks of the Sahara region of North Africa, the first thing that comes to mind is of large swaths and vistas of desert and sand for as far as the eye can see. But this was not always the case. In fact, the Sahara was once a lush and fertile region, supporting a vast number of people and civilizations. The region was one of vast agricultural and livestock wealth. As a result of the rains that supported this area, a large number of prosperous cities and kingdoms were able to thrive and expand. Indications of this climate are seen from weathering on the limestone of the Sphinx in Egypt and on the pyramids. This belt of green and lush vegetation stretched from North Africa to Israel and even portions of Mesopotamia and Arabia. However, by 1100 BC, the entire region had plunged into drought and wars. Many of the once vibrant cities and towns collapsed into ruins and had been abandoned. Over a period of 100 to 200 years, the entire region became a desert. Warfare, pestilence, and famine seems to have been the rule of the day, and were the result of large-scale changes in the normal weather patterns that once brought reliable rains and moderate temperatures to the region. The ultimate result of the drought was a regional disaster that left cities and towns abandoned and dissolving into dust, and a desert region unable to support the same level of civilization that it once did. And so began a dark age that took centuries to overcome. Studies of pollen grain distribution show the sudden drop-off in vegetation very clearly, and with radiocarbon dating, the exact dates of the disaster range from its beginning in 1250 BC to 1100 BC. Some theories postulate that other causes like earthquake, war, and disease were the root causes of the ultimate collapse of the Bronze Age. But it would seem that the absence of rain was the ultimate cause of the collapse of the ecosystem and the civilizations in the region. During a span of 150 years, the majority of the Bronze Age empires completely disappeared and crumbled away to dust. The Egyptian Empire gave way to a less prosperous civilization, and the Hittite Empire, the previously mentioned Greek Mycenaean culture, the Syrian trading empire of the Ugarites, and the copper-producing island of Cyprus all fell into chaos. Bronze, a metal combination of copper and tin, was once one of the predominant metals produced in this area of the world, and was a high-tech product for its time in history. With the loss of the industries that once produced bronze tools and weapons, the remaining civilizations were forced to switch to new metals, specifically iron tools and weapons. This age became known as the Iron Age, and as technology improved over time, the discovery of how to create steel tools and implements utterly transformed the world. This widespread use of iron led to improved steel-making technology at lower costs. Over the ages, iron remained cheaper, stronger, and lighter, and forged iron implements permanently replaced bronze as a preferred metal. The world might have had to wait centuries for more steel and iron tools to arrive, but for the change in the weather which forced humanity to adapt and to use alternative metals. The collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations caused a wholesale change in technology, and the world might have had to wait centuries more for steel and iron tools to arrive. All of this because of a change in the weather. Number 3. The Plague of Justinian. The Plague of Justinian was a pandemic that affected the Eastern Roman Empire in the years 541 to 542 AD. The most commonly accepted cause of the pandemic is bubonic plague, which later became infamous for causing the devastating Black Death pandemics of the 14th century. The social and cultural impact of the plague during this period is comparable to that of the aforementioned Black Plague, and reportedly resulted in a death toll of somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 people daily in the capital city of Constantinople near its peak. The accuracy of this number is in question, but there is no doubt about the sheer number of dead bodies overwhelming the normal funeral and burial practices of the time. An acceptable figure for the numbers of dead is that upward of 5,000 people a day were killed by the plague, and up to 40% of the city of Constantinople's citizens were slain by the disease in the initial wave. Subsequent waves of the plague throughout the eastern Mediterranean resulted in the deaths of up to 1/4 of all people who lived in the region, making this a truly epic disaster. The death toll is estimated to have been between 40 to 100 million people. This plague struck as far north as Denmark, southern Asia, and the Middle East, and the plague returned with each generation throughout the Mediterranean and surrounding worlds. The reason the plague was named for the Emperor Justinian was that he refused to show mercy to his citizens through the worst of the disaster. He not only demanded his annual tax from them, but also demanded that these citizens pay the taxes of those neighbors who were deceased because of the plague. The net effect was that crops were not able to be grown or harvested, and inflation drove up the price of grain across the empire. Justinian tried to continue his wars and a number of huge church construction projects that were costly even in prosperous times. Tax revenues fell, and the sheer number of dead caused a massive increase in the number of people who had died without wills, necessitating special legislation to deal with the probate of these estates. The long-term effect on European and Christian history resulted in the enemies of the empire, namely the Goths, becoming re-energized in their attacks on the empire. Had it not been for the plague, the Eastern Roman Empire would likely have permanently reunited with the Western Roman Empire. The reunification that did occur did not last long, and an invasion of northern Italy by the Germanic Lombards in 568 AD fractured the reunited empire once again. Only the Black Death, in a series of plagues in the 14th century, caused more death and destruction than Justinian's plague, and its effect on world history proved just as impactful. We will cover this plague in a future episode of Light 5 Media. Number 2. The Antioch Earthquake. In late May of 526 AD, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck in Syria. The city of Antioch, now located in Turkey, was at that time a part of the Byzantine Empire. The death toll from this earthquake resulted in 250,000 to 300,000 people dead. This earthquake is rated as the third deadliest earthquake of all time. The area in which this earthquake occurred has been affected by many large earthquakes during the past 2,000 years of recorded history. The quake caused the port of Seleucia Perea to rise by nearly 1 meter, resulting in a silting of the harbor and left it unusable. The earthquake caused severe damage to many of the buildings in Antioch, including Constantine's great octagonal church Domus Aurea, built on an island in the Orontes River. The church was destroyed by fire 7 days after the earthquake. In fact, most of the damage caused by the earthquake was caused by fires that destroyed the remaining buildings left standing after the earthquake. The earthquake's extremely high death toll has been theorized to have been caused by a large number of visitors to Antioch to celebrate Ascension Day. Among the many victims of the disaster was Euphrasius, the Patriarch of Antioch, who died by falling into a cauldron of pitch being used by wineskin makers. The only part of Euphrasius's body that remained untouched by the pitch was his head, or so goes the story. The emperor, Justine I, reacted to the news of the earthquake by removing his symbols of rank and power, and entered his church to lament the destruction of Antioch. He immediately dispatched officials to render aid to the city and begin its reconstruction. For 18 months after the initial earthquake, aftershocks shook the region. Later earthquakes near Antioch destroyed many of the buildings that were either repaired or created after the original 526 AD quake. Number 1. Pompeii. Pompeii was a Roman town of approximately 11,000 people located near modern-day Naples, Italy. Pompeii and the nearby town of Herculaneum were wiped out and buried under nearly 20 feet of ash and pumice during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. At the time of its destruction, the city had a complex water system, an amphitheater, a gymnasium, and a seaport. Just prior to Mount Vesuvius erupting in 79 AD, it warned the people with an earthquake which was ignored. The people were used to minor earthquakes, and Pliny the Younger wrote that the earth tremors, quote, were not particularly alarming because they are frequent in Campania. A prior earthquake in 62 AD caused significant damage to the city. Rebuilding efforts had been underway in the city during the years before the large earthquake of 79 AD. Pompeii, despite the earthquake damage, had been a vacation spot where many Romans kept villas, and by the time of the eruption in 79 AD, had reached a high point as a tourism spot. Agriculture was a feature of the area due to the good volcanic soil that supported a wide variety of crops. On August 24, 79 AD, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Mount Vesuvius erupted in a small number of emissions that were described by Pliny the Younger as follows. Quote, for several days past there have been earth tremors, which were not particularly alarming because they are frequent in Campania, But that night the shocks were so violent that everything felt as if it were not only shaken, but overturned. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the volcano erupted violently, and a cloud of ash rose high above the mountain. Within 30 minutes, the ash cloud drifted over Pompeii. Pliny the Younger recorded the sight as resembling, quote, a cloud of unusual size and appearance, being like an umbrella pine, for it rose to a great height on sort of a trunk and then split off into branches. By 3 o'clock, the city was under siege, as hardened lava fragments pummeled the area and caused people to seek shelter or flee for their lives. The river Sarno and the seaport became impassable to ships, and earthquakes rocked the city. Pliny the Younger recorded, quote, there was a danger from falling pumice stones, and as a protection against falling objects, they put pillows on their heads tied down with cloths. We also saw the sea sucked away, so that large quantities of sea creatures were left stranded on dry sand. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the conditions had become intolerable. Ash and lava stones began pummeling the city, and building roofs began to collapse under the sheer weight of the ash and the stones. Early the next day, on August 25th, mud flows spilled down the volcano, and the debris rose higher than the upper stories of buildings. Those within suffocated to death. At this point, pyroclastic flows of superheated ash began to spill down the mountain as the volcanic cloud became too heavy to support itself in the atmosphere and collapsed to the ground, surging in waves across the towns of Herculaneum and Pompeii. The final wave of superheated ash hit between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning, and this was the final blow that killed most of the people who had remained behind. The ash continued to fall and buried the towns until there was no trace of them left to be seen. For nearly 1,800 years, the cities were only legend, and then Herculaneum, followed by Pompeii, were rediscovered and excavated. During the excavations, the voids of people's bodies who were killed in the disaster were discovered, and when cast with plaster, revealed the horrific manner of their deaths. Over time, the towns eventually surrendered their secrets, showing an average day in the life of a Roman citizen with art frescoes, ordinary objects, and buildings preserved as they had existed at the time of the eruption. Some of the recovered artistic frescoes, such as the one depicting the fertility god Priapus, were so offensive to 19th century archaeology officials that they were locked away and only recently rediscovered in the late 20th century. Pompeii and Herculaneum now are tourist centers that host millions of visitors annually. They serve as potent reminders of how quickly a volcano can take life, even as it creates life. Today, Mount Vesuvius remains a very dangerous volcano, and is poised one day to erupt again, just as it did before. Only this time, the death toll could be in the hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, due to the number of large cities in close proximity to the volcano. This fact makes Mount Vesuvius to be one of the most dangerous volcanoes on Earth. During ancient times, human beings were often at the mercy of large-scale forces and natural disasters that often struck without warning. But even our civilization would struggle to survive these terrible disasters that befell our ancestors, and from which they ultimately triumphed and recovered. The 2004 and 2010 earthquakes and tsunamis in Sumatra and in Japan were shocking examples of how vulnerable any civilization is to the destructive forces of nature, no matter how advanced these civilizations may be. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video. And don't forget to like and subscribe.